Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back. Today, we are going to take a look at World War One and kind of how it developed, how America was involved, and everything surrounding the First World War itself. So, as we know, nationalism is going to play a very large part in World War One. We talked about nationalism before, as far as American imperialism. Throughout the world, people are imperializing, people are becoming more and more proud of their country, and it's going to lead to some issues. Now, remember, uh, there are four main reasons for World War One to happen, right? That was militarism, alliances, imperialism, and militarism. You had countries building up their militaries, spreading their power throughout the world, and really just kind of you could see the writing on the wall as far as um, a war coming. Now, in Europe, before the war starts, a lot of tension going on. There's a lot of alliances between countries. You would have the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente. Now, eventually, there would be an assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Right? He's a he's an Archduke of Austria. He and his wife go to um, Bosnia and are gunned down by a Serbian radical. Well, the Germans or the Austrians wanted payment for the murder, but it was too late, and World War One essentially starts there. Now, nations did end up taking sides, right? So by mid August of 1914, you have the Central Powers, which were made up of Austria, Hungary, and Germany, and you had the Allied powers that were Great Britain, France, Russia, Japan, and Italy. Those would be the Allied powers. And so they the Central Powers are the Central Powers really because they're boxed in by the Allies. You have Germany and Austria-Hungary kind of in the middle of all these other forces. So you have a Western front, you have an Eastern front, and that's what's going to be fought. And it's going to be fought in a new type of warfare called trench warfare, which you hopefully are familiar with. They fight out of these trenches, they live in these trenches, and the trenches are pretty gross. But it would be the first war that uses tanks. It would also use airplanes more effectively, and really just trying to move forward. Now, as I said, there's a lot of technology comes out during this time. Tanks, machine guns, Gatling guns are going to be used. Repeating rifles, so it's not just single shot. You have semi-automatic rifles coming at you. Um, the Germans would have U-boats, and of course, the chemical gases and chlorine gas and mustard gas that both sides would use. Now, America at this time practiced neutrality, right? Neutrality is a policy in which a country doesn't take sides. They stay out of the foreign affairs and are just going to kind of do their own thing. And this makes sense because America is not in Europe, and they feel like they're really not. They don't need to be involved with this. So they had no alliances really going into the war, and they remained out of the war as long as possible. Now, this was tested, the practice of neutrality, in 1915. Right, so on May 7th of 1915, a German U-boat would sink a British passenger ship called the Lusitania, and there were about 1,198 people on board that were killed, and within that there were 128 U.S. citizens. So then President Woodrow Wilson's like, "Hey, Germany, cut it out. Uh, you can't be attacking ships, or else we'll be joining the war." And Germany's like, yeah, we don't want you to join the war. We're already having issues as it is. And Germany agrees not to sink any more passenger ships, and this is known as the Sussex Pledge. Now, even though the United States is practicing neutrality, they still have to live in a world that's globalized, right? They still have to live in a world that is um, kind of intermingled. Now, America itself is going to practice a little bit of globalism here, even though they're not in the war. They're still using things, uh, supplies, um, and some people just sign up to go fight in the European theater. So we are neutral, but there are people trying to step up and join the war from America. Now, America would suspend its neutrality because of a letter written to Mexico from Germany in February of 1917, essentially saying, "Hey, Mexico, go attack the United States and reclaim the land that was taken from you during the Mexican-American War." Now, America says, "Okay, well, Germany, that's how you feel about it. We're going to join the war." So, on April 2nd, 1917, the United States officially joins World War One. Now, all these countries are practicing something called total war. And total war is when your country totally devotes all of their resources to the war effort, right? So, Germany, Britain, Austria Hungary, France, the United States, they're all going to be practicing total war. Governments are going to take control of companies, telling them what they can and can't make. And pretty much all able bodied men are going to, not just men, women, children, they're going to support the war effort, be it fighting, be it being a nurse, or even working, collecting scrap metal, whatever they can do is going to be uh, beneficial to the war effort. So World War One is really the first time that we see a huge tick up since the Industrial Revolution in American industry. So over a 4-year period, the U.S. exports to Europe go from 1.47 billion dollars to about $4 billion within those 4 years of the war. The private sector itself is going to see a very significant increase in demand for supplies for the American Army during the war. They need to make bullets, they need to make planes, they need to make whatever they can to support the war effort. Um, So it's pretty incredible. Now, women during World War One, thousands of them go out and they are going to replace the men that are off fighting the war. So they're going to build tanks, build guns, build planes, make uniforms, pave streets, work in hospitals, whatever they can do to help the war effort. And it's really a pretty amazing thing for women to do. They step up and go, "Hey, look, we can do this," which really gives them a step in the door as far as um, what women are expected to do in American society. Now, eventually, the Central Powers are going to collapse, right? So Germany and Austria-Hungary, they start seeing the writing on the wall. The war on the Eastern Front ends because of the Russian Revolution. You have the Communist Party, known as the Bolsheviks, take over and really just say, "You know what, we're done fighting. We're not going to do this anymore." Excuse me. Sorry, had something in my throat. So kind of interesting though. So the Germans actually pay about $10 million to the Bolsheviks for them to take over in Russia. So Germany realizes that they can't win on two fronts, so they throw some money at a revolution in Russia, which allows Russia to stop fighting in World War One. It puts Vladimir Lenin in power, and the Eastern Front effectively ends. Now, by May of 1918, the Central Powers finally were able to look like they might win this war. But because of the Zimmerman telegram and the Lusitania and the United States joining the war effort, there's about 140,000 new U.S. troops that the Germans really weren't accounting for, and they would fight at probably the last major battle known as the Battle of the Marne. After this battle, Germany was totally destroyed, and Kaiser Wilhelm II steps down as ruler, and the war ends by armistice, right? And that's just an agreement to end fighting, and the war is essentially over. Now, after the war ends, they'll have something called the Paris Peace Conference, and it has what we call the Big Four involved, right? That's going to be the U.S., France, England, and Italy. They meet and they're going to lay out plans to what are they going to do with Germany and Austria-Hungary after the war ends. Now, Woodrow Wilson, the representative from the United States, comes up with these 14 points. And the 14 points would be kind of used as a uh, baseline for what the Treaty of Versailles would be. And so the 14 points, not going to go over all of them, but the important parts, it wanted to end any secret treaties for Germany. So they can't have any secret treaties, couldn't have any alliances. People could sail German waters with no problem, no worries about being attacked. free trade with Germany. Um, they're going to make it so Germany's going to reduce their armies, fix some colonial claims as far as uh, land that Germany held. They're going to create some new nations and create something called the League of Nations, which is a general assembly of nations to make sure that a world war never happens again. Obviously, it doesn't work. So France was insistent about blaming Germany for the war. Like, no, this is Germany's fault. Like all the damage that they did, and they wanted to cripple Germany for any future military action. They said we don't want Germany ever to be able to do this again. So they said Germany needs to pay $33 billion in war reparations. Right, this is payment for economic injury during the war. This amount of money was more than Germany would be able to pay, and in fact, they went into debt almost immediately. Now, this whole Treaty of Versailles thing was finally signed by Germany, and it really did punish Germany. It placed sole responsibility of World War One on Germany. They were responsible for all of the war debt. Um, they're no longer allowed to have an army or a navy, and it did create a couple new countries. What was Austria-Hungary was now Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Yugoslavia. So they cut it up, and Germany's hurting pretty bad. So after World War One, America does become kind of a world power. They're seen on a global scale as somebody who you really don't want to mess around with. Economically, they're doing well, and partially because there was no battles fought in the United States, so the United States can continue their industry without having to rebuild anything. The military power is going to grow and grow, and yeah, the Americans are just a viable power in the world. Now, shifting over to Russia, right? So we have this thing called the Red Scare. And the Red Scare is this, it's a lot like what the Cold War would eventually become. So once the Russian Bolsheviks, the Communist Party, took over in Russia, um, they have a new leader, and that's going to be the man known as Vladimir Lenin. At this point, and really up until 1992, communism and American capitalism are going to clash over ideologies, economic philosophies, government policies, and people were really afraid of what was going on throughout the world. So, what is communism? What does it look like, right? So, communism and socialism are kind of similar, and there's actually never been a truly socialist country. Even if they say they're socialist, they're actually going to be communist. These this economic model, this political model, really do stress to seek to eliminate any social classes, and um, they never work. It's a utopian ideology, and it ends up never working. There's always somebody in charge, and there's always somebody taking your money. There's no wealth, there's no poor, but over time, it demotivates people to work hard, and they end up becoming a pretty struggling country. But we'll get all into that. Now, to take on this communism, the United States creates pretty much a section of the FBI focused on capturing communists, getting them out of the country. Now, the leader of this is a gentleman by the name of J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover is going to be the leader of the FBI and leads a lot of different raids on suspected communists, even if they weren't. So if they think you're a communist or a communist sympathizer, you might get arrested, you might be deported to Russia or thrown in jail. These were pretty was unconstitutional. You can't just wiretap people. You can't spy on people that don't have a reason to be spied on, right? And that falls under the Fourth Amendment, right to privacy, right to private property, all that, all that fun stuff. Now, J. Edgar Hoover did this for quite a while, um, but it it doesn't last forever. And really, the Red Scare loses steam because of stock market crash in 1928, and Americans kind of stopped concerning themselves with the fear of communism and more so focus on the fear of not having jobs or money. So we will be getting into the 1920s, the 18th and 19th Amendment, but in a nutshell, um, World War One really kind of allowed America to put itself in a place that was was seen as a viable world power. Now, also during this time, after and it's kind of a side note, but they have something called the Great Migration. And this is the period of time after the Civil War, all the way up through really the 1960s, where you see a lot of African Americans moving from the South, the Jim Crow South, up into the more free North. So that's a great migration. It's important, but we're not going to spend much time on it. So that's it for this video. Check in next time, guys. We're going to be talking about some civil liberties and civil rights stuff um, in the early 20th century, the 1920s. So until next time, see you later.